All right, so we're just going to start by introducing ourselves. So I'm Sarah. I'm from Greenville, North Carolina. I am studying journalism and communications at UNC right now. I'm a sophomore, so it's my second year. And my areas of interest are France and Thailand. My dad is from Thailand, and I studied French in high school and in my first year at UNC.
Hi everyone, I'm Ava. I'm from Carborough, North Carolina, and I am studying Spanish and global studies with a focus on Latin America. And I was in a dual language program, so I learned Spanish starting in kindergarten, and I have had the chance to travel to Spain, Costa Rica, and Cuba.
All right, so first we kind of want to get a sense of what you all know about pollution and climate change. So we have just a few Zoom polls. And if you're on the YouTube live stream, you can give any answers in the chat. So the first question is, climate is A, short weather, or B, long patterns of weather?
Here is the answer, long patterns of weather. I'm going to go ahead and do the next poll.
All right, so the second question is, do greenhouse gases make Earth warmer or cooler?
Correct. You guys put warmer. I'll pull up the next one. Is this on the next slide, or is this the same?
I think all the questions are the same slide, yeah.
All right, and it looks like I put the rest of these poll questions into the same poll, so you can answer them as you go. So we have trees, and the options are help control greenhouse gases or put more greenhouse gases around the Earth. And then the next one is, does climate change impact North Carolina? Yes or no? And something that I can do to stop pollution are buy less plastic, reuse things, recycle, or all three. So you can answer those questions. So trees help control greenhouse gases. Climate change does impact North Carolina, and you're correct. All three of those can help stop pollution.
All right, so first we'll just talk about what climate is and why it's changing. So climate is the long patterns of weather. Here in North Carolina, where a lot of us are from, we do have different seasons. So in the winter, it might be cold, and in the spring, it might be warmer and rainier. Those are kinds of weather, but that's not climate. Climate is really long patterns of weather that can happen from tens to hundreds of years. And Earth's climate is getting warmer. So even though we might still have winter and spring, and summer is really hot, all of our seasons are getting warmer together. And humans have a big impact. The climate has always changed, at least a little bit, since Earth has been around. But what humans are doing now is making climate change faster than it's changed before. All right, so we'll watch this little video that just gives us an overview of climate and greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases also make the earth warmer. They trap heat from the sun. Greenhouse gases are like a blanket covering the earth. It started in the 1700s. Humans started to build more things. We burned coal to make electricity. We burned oil to make our cars and planes move. We use chemicals to make things. We cut down lots of trees. We burn gas to cook food. We dump lots of trash on landfills. We plant a lot more rice. All these things release greenhouse gases. Remember the blanket over the earth? Because of humans, it got much, much thicker. When I get hot, I sweat. I even get
it there, Liz.
Imagine the earth. Because it's hot.
All right, thank you everyone for your patience on that. We haven't had any tech issues yet until this session, but always get them for one.
Greenhouse gases also make the earth warmer. They trap.
All right, so that video gave us a little overview of what greenhouse gases do to the earth. So what are greenhouse gases? Not all gases are bad. Gases like oxygen are good for humans. That's the gas that we breathe. But we call greenhouse gases because greenhouses keep things warm. So greenhouses are like these clear houses that farmers and gardeners keep their plants in cold seasons like fall and winter, because plants usually need to be warm to survive. So farmers and gardeners use these to keep the plants warm when it would usually be cold. And so we call these greenhouse gases because they're gases that kind of act like a greenhouse for Earth. They keep us a little bit warmer when we should be a little bit cooler. So like the person said in the video, greenhouse gases are like these blankets that cover Earth. Sometimes when you get under a blanket, it feels nice for a little while, but after some time you might get hot and you might want to take those blankets off. But greenhouse gas blankets are really hard to take off around the Earth. In this picture, it shows Earth and some blankets, and it says CO2. That's a type of greenhouse gas. It's also sometimes called carbon. So that's one of the gases we'll talk about today. CO2 or carbon can come from a lot of different things. Sometimes it's natural. Humans create CO2 when we breathe. So we take in oxygen and we put out CO2. That's not bad. It's okay for humans to breathe and to put out CO2 in that way. But humans are creating a lot more CO2 because of the things we do today. So CO2 can come from things like when we create things in factories, or when we drive cars and buses, or when we use energy to do things like light up our houses or keep our houses warm. One thing that can kind of help us take off these blankets that are around Earth are trees. So trees take out the carbon dioxide from around the Earth and they turn it into oxygen that humans can use to breathe. And if you go to the next slide. The issue is that a lot of our trees are being cut down. So once these trees are cut down, they can't take out that CO2 out of the air and turn it into oxygen. And all of the CO2 that was held in the tree before goes back out into the air. And so this video will talk a little bit about how trees help us.
In trees, however, a large portion of that carbon isn't released and instead is stored as newly formed wood tissue. During their lifetimes, trees act as carbon vaults, and they continue to draw down carbon for as long as they grow. However, when a tree dies and decays, some of its carbon will be released back into the air. A significant amount of CO2 is stored in the soil, where it can remain for thousands of years. But eventually, that carbon also seeps back into the atmosphere. So if trees are going to help fight a long-term problem like climate change, they need to survive to sequester their carbon for the longest period possible, while also reproducing quickly.
All right, so we heard in that video that for trees to be able to help us with carbon and for them to be able to help us take off some of those blankets that are around Earth, they have to be able to live and grow for a long time. But an issue with this is that every day a lot of trees are cut down all around the world. They can be cut down for things like making paper or furniture from the wood. Or if we go to the next slide, we also see that they might be cut down to make food for us. So whenever there's a farm that wants to create fields for animals like cows or pigs, that means that they have to cut down any of the trees that are on that land to be able to make that field. Trees are also cut down to make farms for things like growing fruits and vegetables. And these aren't quite as bad because these are still plants. They still help us get rid of CO2 a little bit. They just don't do it quite as well as trees. And so when we also have fields to raise animals like pigs and cows, that means that we have to have twice as many of these fields that grow fruits and vegetables fruits and vegetables because we have to be able to feed ourselves with that, but we also have to be able to feed the animals. Another thing that humans are doing that is putting out more greenhouse gases is throwing our stuff away. So sometimes we do have to throw stuff away. We can't really avoid it all the time. But our trash goes to these places called landfills. And so it doesn't just take a lot of energy to make the things that we end up throwing away. They also start putting out greenhouse gases. So things like plastic, plastic puts out CO2 as it breaks down, but it also takes a really, really long time to break down. So different things made out of plastic can take from hundreds to thousands of years to break down and become something that can go back into the earth. And so also on the next slide, things like paper and food break down a little bit easier than plastic. But they create this gas called methane when they break down in landfills, and methane hurts Earth a lot because of how long it stays in the atmosphere. It stays in the air a lot longer than carbon dioxide does, so that means that we have to wait longer and longer to take off those blankets. So we talked a little bit about what climate is and why it changes, but now we'll talk about what happens when it does change. So first, Earth is getting warmer. This is something we call global warming because it's not just getting hotter in one place, it's getting hotter all over the Earth. For some places, it might be getting hot faster, but in general, the whole Earth is getting warmer. And this might not seem like a big deal. We might not notice it every single day or every year, but it can have a lot of big impacts on Earth. So first, when Earth gets hotter, it means that the land gets drier. So warm air pulls out water, and we don't see water in the ground with our eyes, but it's there. So when the air is warm, it pulls the water out of the ground, and it makes it hard to do things like farm in places like Texas or Arizona. And so when they want to farm in dry places, that means they have to use even more water. And hot air doesn't just pull water out of lakes and ponds or just the ground, it also pulls out water from plants and trees. And so because of that, we have more forest fires today and they last longer. Because when trees are dry, it becomes super easy for them to catch on fire, especially when it's hot outside. So we've always had forest fires. They've always been a thing, but we have more of them now and they last longer because of how hot Earth is getting. When Earth gets warmer, it also means that habitats change. A habitat is the place where animals live. So if you and I are tired of living somewhere, it's pretty easy for us to get up and move, but it's not that easy for animals. So one example is coral reefs. Like the one we see here, you might have seen these in movies like Nemo. The animals that live in these places have to have a certain temperature. It has to be pretty cool for them to live there. But because the ocean is getting warmer, it means that animals are dying there, the corals are losing their color, and so the fish are having to try to find new places to live, and that's not exactly easy for them. When Earth gets warmer, that also means that glaciers melt. Glaciers are these huge blocks of ice. They can be as big as islands or continents, but they also have animals living on them. So like the polar bear you see in the picture, that would normally live on a glacier or somewhere really cold. But because the glaciers are melting, they are finding it harder to find places to live and to be able to get food. And so that's bad for them because they're not meant to be ocean animals. They need those glaciers to be able to live. And so when glaciers melt, that also means that the sea level rises. So the water that was in the ice is no longer sitting on top of the ocean. It's now water that's gone into the ocean. And so the sea level is how high the ocean is. And so it's been rising slowly because the ice is melting. And this is also something really slow. It's not something we'll notice every day or every year. but it can be really serious over a long period of time. And so on this slide, we'll watch a short video about what happens when the sea level rises.
Water temperatures also cause a lot of the ice to melt, and it ends up in the ocean. A child born today can expect the ocean to rise between 1 and 4 feet in their lifetime. In the United States alone, nearly 5 million people live within 4 feet of the local high tide level. That could mean increased flooding from storm surges. And as the ocean rises, its salt water can mix with our rivers and groundwater, which is where many people get fresh water for drinking and farming.
All right, so the next thing I'll talk about is hurricanes. Hurricanes happen when hot air mixes with cold air, and like we talked about before, warm air pulls up water from things like lakes and ponds, but it also pulls it up from the ocean. And so again, hurricanes are something we've always had, but they are stronger now because that warm air is pulling so much water up and it's putting it down over us on the land.
So now we're going to talk about North Carolina. So a hurricane that we experienced in North Carolina 2 years ago in 2018 was Hurricane Florence, and it hit the coast really hard and affected all parts of the state. And there was major flooding, like as you can see in that picture below, and there was also huge waves as a result of the storm. And so because of climate change, waters were warming, and that created an extra strong hurricane and gave it more power, and that's why it was felt all across the state.
And I see Miss Williams says that Swansboro, North Carolina remembers this, and not fondly, so that was a difficult time.
Yeah. So another cause of climate change, like Sarah mentioned, is the sea level rising. So in North Carolina, the sea level has risen 11 inches since the year 1950, and it's supposed to rise 6 more inches within the next 15 years, which doesn't seem like it's going super fast, but that's 6 inches can affect a lot of people. So one of the things that allows people to be protected, or like that protects houses from rising oceans, is these sand dunes, as you can see in that picture. So North Carolina has been rebuilding the beaches after Hurricane Florence, and sand dunes are really important for protecting houses and different ecosystems along the coast. So another thing that we experience in North Carolina and everywhere is plastic pollution. And so styrofoam, as you can see in those pictures, like the styrofoam cup and the container, are one of the worst plastics. And Americans throw out 7 million styrofoam cups each day, which is a lot of plastic. And it's a type of plastic that we can only use once. And it takes a really long time to break down in the environment. So North Carolina is trying to ban the use of these plastics. So instead of using things like styrofoam cups, it's better to buy alternatives like water bottles that you can reuse. And as you can see, plastics end up in the ocean and affect wildlife as well. So in this picture, we can see that a sea turtle is caught up in a fishing line, and some 2,000 sea turtles nest on North Carolina each summer. And so many times, if there's plastic in the water, like plastic bags, sea turtles will mistake it for a jellyfish, which is one of the things that sea turtles eat. and they can't digest the plastic, so they'll either get really sick or not be able to eat anything else, and that can be a real problem for sea turtles and other wildlife too, that ingest plastics that are floating around in the ocean. And plastic straws are another problem for sea turtles and other wildlife because they take a really long time to decompose and the animals can't digest the plastic. So it's not just on the coast that North Carolina is affected by this plastic pollution. This is a picture of the Cape Fear River and then Durham's Ellerby Creek. And so plastic doesn't break down naturally, and so it piles up. And then eventually, even when it decomposes, there are microplastics that are still present in the environment, and also chemicals from the plastic breaking down that can pollute our water sources and also harm animals. So another thing that we see in North Carolina, there's a lot of pig farms and turkey and chicken farms in different parts of North Carolina. And because they're these huge farms that are raising lots of animals, they need some place to keep all of the waste from all of these animals. And so as you see in the picture, they have huge piles of waste in these lakes nearby, like close to the farms, and the water turns red from all of the manure from these animals. And so sometimes when it rains, these lakes or piles of waste overflow, and then all of the manure seeps into different rivers, and that can pollute or contaminate drinking water and affect different people. And so that's an issue that we've been seeing in North Carolina. So what can we do? So natural resources like water and air are really important for all living things, and we need them to survive. So that's why conservation is so important. And so it's important to protect these natural resources. And if we don't protect these things, then it can lead to scarcity. And so conservation prevents pollution. And so if we are conserving these natural resources, then they won't be polluted. But pollution is what makes these like water and air dirty and unsafe for us to use. So we don't want that. So what are some things that we can do to prevent climate change from getting worse and pollution? So the 3 R's are a really good thing to remember: reduce, reuse, recycle. So reducing items is like choose items with less packaging or that you can reuse. So like reduce the amount of plastic bags that you use, and don't use as many styrofoam cups or plastic cups that don't break down well. And you can also reduce the amount of water you use by like while you're brushing your teeth, turning the water off or taking shorter showers. For reusing, you can send clothes to charity, or donate old clothes so that someone else can reuse them. And then also buying things that you can reuse, like water bottles, so that you're not buying a plastic bottle every time you want a drink of water. And then recycling is really important too, like paper and cans and plastic. Some plastics can be recycled and then turned into something else. So that's important.
Want to help clean up the environment? Just remember the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce wasted water and energy by shutting the tap off when you brush your teeth, turning off lights when you leave a room, and unplugging chargers that you're not using. Reuse old things instead of just tossing them in the trash. Drink from a reusable water bottle instead of disposable ones, and use the back side of computer printouts for drawing. And finally, be sure to recycle glass, bottles, cans, and cardboard so they can be used again. Become the household captain of recycling so you can help your friends and family remember. By keeping our earth clean, we create a happy, healthy environment, and that's the power of community. Want to help?
Okay, so now that we're done, let's review things that you might have learned.
All right, I'll pull up the polls. And so I put these all in one poll, but I'll read them off for the people that are in YouTube. So the first question is, what is the name of the effect that is causing the Earth to get hotter? And the options are greenhouse, blue house, or firehouse.
I'm not sure that the polls are showing up on Zoom.
There,
Okay,
can you see it now?
okay.
All right, thank you. So the first question is, what is the effect that is causing the Earth to get hotter? The second question is, how long does it take some plastics to decompose? So your options are 5 to 10 years, 20 to 50 years, or 100 to 1,000 years. You can also write A, B, or C in YouTube. And the last question is, what is an example of something you can reuse? A plastic straw, a metal water bottle, or a styrofoam cup? So you guys can guess those, see what you remember from the presentation. Number 1, the answer was greenhouse, correct. Number 2, how long does it take some plastics to decompose? I know you showed a few different examples there, Ava. And then what is an example of something you can reuse? And a metal water bottle would be something that you can reuse. So for the plastics to decompose, it can vary from different types, I believe. But what was the answer you were going for there, Ava? For number 2?
100 to 1,000 years.
100
But
to 1,000,
yeah,
that's what
it
I
does.
thought. Yeah,
yeah.
The longer end. Some other things that she talked about might take a shorter amount of time. All right, there's the results so that you guys can see. Okay.
Like said, I have been to France once. On the same trip, I also went to the UK and London. Specifically, I was in London and Paris. And I was supposed to be in India this past summer. That didn't happen. Maybe one summer I'll still go, but I'm also planning on at some point going to study in Thailand and Chiang Mai.
So I've been to Spain, Costa Rica, and Cuba. In Cuba, I volunteered with a program called Globalware, and we were in the capital city of Havana. And I did work with preventing erosion there. And in Costa Rica, I did a language school. So I got to practice my Spanish, and I stayed with a host family. And I'm hoping to travel abroad to Argentina.